George Mack, what is the problem with low agency?
It's a great question. So there's a funny way to answer that question, and then there's a unfunny way to answer that question. So, I mean, the funny way to answer it is just to kind of flip the question around, which is, what is the problem with low agency? And low agency / high agency directly relates to two things. One, an individual's ability to identify what problem they want to solve, which I kind of call like alive mode. And then two, how they actually go about solving that problem, which is kind of solving like an alive problem, something that's living and breathing. So your question kind of directly links to the answer, which is quite a funny thing. But the more unfunny one is the regrets of the dying. I think it's Bronnie Ware, the palliative care lady who spent time with hundreds of people that were kind of passing away at the final stages of life, whether that's older people or terminally ill. And if you look at the 5 regrets of the dying, loosely off the top of my head, it's, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had the courage to live a life truer to myself. I wish I didn't work as hard. I wish I stayed in touch with my friends. What's the other one? I've forgotten the other one, actually. There's 5 of them. There's one more. But all 4 of them pretty much relate to something around low agency.
So it revolves around kind of doing things. And then we could almost allude to the point that low agency would not be doing things. Now, I want to bring us back to when I think it was your first episode with Chris, where you bought the cards. Was that the first time or the first high production episode? No hard feelings. That I've been in business with Chris for 2 years, never had a high production episode. Right? We're not going to bring that up here. But you came so well prepared, and even when you had these visual cards to help people understand, I stopped the episode and I had to message you directly and say, "Mate, this is incredible." The preparation that you had for that and the example you used is now how I tell people about this. So can you just explain to people the kind of metaphor that you use to help people understand who around them would potentially be high agency and who would be low agency?
Yeah, the question I ask is the high agency question, which is, you find yourself in a third world jail cell and you can only call one person that you know. Who do you call? And what's strange about that question is everybody seems to have a person in mind when they begin to think about it. And that is the highest agency person that you know. And what's strange is, and why I think that question is particularly pertinent with a lot of people, is it hits at something they've not been able to necessarily describe before. That person might not be the highest IQ or book smart that they know. They might not be have the best bench press that they know, but it's a different trait, a je ne sais quoi, which that question helps encapsulate.
So I think that a lot of people, when they try and hire staff, because I've been through my own issues with hiring, and you sometimes think, okay, I want someone well-educated. Then you think, actually, no, I don't really care. Then you go, I want someone that, will understand the job in and out. And then after you've had some good hires and bad hires, and once you start to understand what agency is, you realize you actually just want a high agency individual, someone who is always going to be proactive. And there's almost an issue with not understanding that agency or understanding that kind of traits that people have that I couldn't believe I'd been 35 years without being able to put my finger on it. Mm-hmm. So when we look at the world of professionalism, entrepreneurialism, success, how much of a factor do you think agency plays within someone's ability to get ahead of other people?
Pretty significant. I think there's a few things to unpack there. So the first thing that you mentioned there around, you didn't have a word for it for like 35 years. So the other day I was talking to a friend and I was describing that concept. So ironically, I didn't have a word for not having a word for something, and the value of when you have a word for something, how valuable that is. Like this whole fucking meta game that I was playing. And he's mentioned this idea from Scott Alexander, which he calls idea handles. So one thing Chris does very well about creating idea handles that you can then pick up. So like high agency is one of those things that mean you kind of knew. It's the je ne sais quoi. You kind of like could describe it in multiple paragraphs, but having it into 2 words, like a compressed meme, is super useful. Related to their careers, I think it significantly helps. And there's different forms of agency that we can kind of describe, but particularly related to, there was this meme the other day of like different levels of people that you work with, and kind of level 1, imagine like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like level 1 is, hey, James, I just don't know what to do until you tell me to do something. And even then I won't do it. And then kind of like level 2 is like follows instructions. And then all the way up at like the final tier is, hey, James, there was this problem that I've already identified and I've solved it. I'm just keeping you in the loop on what I've done. Like that's the kind of highest tier. And in terms of helping their career, I think it's one of the most significant traits that exists.
Now, can we train people to become more or higher agency, or is it something that's kind of deep rooted into someone's persona and psychology?
So the low agency answer is no. And the high agency answer is yes. So it's kind of a little bit of a paradox within that. The low agency answer would just say people are determined by their genetics or their environment, whereas the high agency answer is that you could turn agency in on itself, and then you could actually get higher and higher agency. I think, like most things in life, both answers have a little bit of truth to them, but I lean more towards the latter, that it's definitely something that an individual can improve upon.
Would there be some motivational mechanisms that you would tie in towards this? Because if I was to look at my own personal journey, I've definitely over the years become higher agency. I can't put my finger on why. I can't put my finger on potentially the sole cause or purpose of it. But to me, it must be drawn to some kind of motivation within that person's life, whether it is trying to overcome some kind of emotional trauma as a kid and not being loved and accepted and becoming some incredible social media influencer, which I think maybe a lot of people in the public eye could be in denial about. Or it could be a financial thing where you might come from nothing and want to be able to provide for your family. When it comes to looking into the reasons as to why some people would be motivated to do this, because it sounds really bad. I have so much respect for high agency individuals, but then at the same time, I can almost see it as like an acute mental illness. So why is it that we're like this?
It's a question. And I think that, I mean, the first answer is, even when we discuss like low agency individuals, high agency individuals, I don't almost like that term in a way, even though maybe I'm helped propagated the term, is that you have some high agency, quote unquote high agency, and some quote unquote low agency people that in certain areas of their life, they're really low agency, and then certain areas of their life, they're really high agency. So for example, I'm sure in your years of personal training, you've met some like incredible CEOs that are extremely resourceful, proactive at solving problems. But then as soon as it gets to their weight, they have such emotional bottlenecks or ways they get in their own way. So that's my first problem with that term. And then the second thing, just to kind of flesh the needle a little bit, to go back to what I said at the start, I don't just want agency necessarily to refer to doing things. Like there's a part of it which is you also have to understand the why you're doing things. And I always use the example of, let's say, I call it low agency James Bond. So like imagine, like I think a lot of people when they think of high agency, they think of James Bond as like the pinnacle. Hopefully Amazon don't destroy him and he's like this crazy like woke individual that is like really, really careful in the workplace. But people think of like the apex example as James Bond. But let's say Bond comes home after another escapade in Russia where he's killed the guy in the casino and he's swooned all the girls and he's done everything and he's driving the Aston Martin back. And he gets home and he opens up his laptop and gets a Microsoft Word file. And he's been putting off that romance novel for 10 years. And he's afraid to publish it because what people will think because he's James Bond. In that case, well, is he high agency? Because in some regards, yes. But if he's ultimately outsourcing his sense of self to other people, he's also low agency. So it's such a nuanced one to run through.
It's interesting you say that. The second you think about that, I think about other domains in my life where I've been two different people at the same time. Where I remember reading Mindset by Carol Dweck about, the ability to have a growth and a fixed mindset. And it was crazy how in business, if there was any kind of shortcoming or trip up or issue, if my Instagram got deleted tomorrow, I'd be like, right, let's create a new one. Let's go. We're going to build it up. We're going to turn this into a positive. However, if I looked into my personal relationships in my life for the first 33 years, anytime something went wrong, it's their fault, they're mental, nothing wrong with me, all these girls are crazy, I'm getting out of here. So I had a very fixed, or like, let's just say my mindset towards business was in a good place, but I had the complete polar opposite ability when it came to personal relationships. Oh, well, mate, this could be a discussion for a therapist or, someone else. Probably deep-rooted psychological issues, or, I would even sometimes, if it was getting real heated, I'd pull the adoption card out. I'd be like, there's something here, maybe it's to do with the fact, my parents gave me up as a child. I don't know. I'm playing on that. But then it made me realize, okay, you can be two things at the same time, which is such a great point about agency. Now, another thing I've always kind of been curious about when looking at the environment around me is the tendency to make a decision whether or not you want to surround yourself with high agency people or quote unquote low agency people. Because I think we can sometimes misunderstand the impact of our social circles on us. This is a really weird analogy to kind of use, but I had some Welsh friends growing up at uni, and if I spent too much time with them, I started picking up the twang within a few weeks. So if I can pick up a Welsh/West Country accent just from spending time with friends, what kind of impact can someone's mindset, vision, energy, what time they wake up, what they're doing? You've just moved in with Chris Williamson, which I can't help but think is obviously friendship, but also strategic. And actually, I think that if I was brutally honest with you, almost every one of my best friends is a strategic relationship as much as it is a genuine relationship. So this agency frequency in which we emit, we are picking people of a similar vibration, let's say, so that we are not facing any undue restrictions into getting to where we want. Would you say that's accurate?
I think loosely so. Yeah. I think I had this idea handle from a long time ago, which was treadmill friends and sofa friends. Because I was trying to describe a phenomenon that I was experiencing, which is there's certain friends of mine that I'd hang around, and again, particularly leans towards more of a British thing, which I don't want to harp on the UK thing, but where after hanging out, you kind of want to lay on a sofa to recover. Whereas there's other friends that after I hang out, I have so much excess energy that I need to go on a treadmill just to burn it off to go to sleep that night. So like treadmill friends and sofa friends. I read a great tweet the other day of, I think from Jeremy Giffon, and he was saying like the best conversations or the best friendships are ones that are both produce like you feel energy afterwards, but also generative in terms of ideas. But for me, I think the problem, and I can already see the YouTube comments now, James, that the problem that people will maybe think is you should just hang around with the most successful person and therefore you will be more successful. And again, like everything in life, it's not as black and white as that. Like there's definitely utility of hanging around people who are further on in their careers and you learn from them. But I would also rather be around people that I kind of call in a live mode, that, you know what, they figured out what they want to do and they just want to play the saxophone 5 nights a week. I find that person in a way almost has more agency, that I want to hang around more than the miserable CEO that can't leave because he's afraid of what people think. So it's not just a pure fucking upwards. You know what I mean? Because if you do that, like it's a pyramid that basically the only person like everybody's trying to hang out with is Elon Musk. You know what I mean? You just kind of work all the way up the stack. And then by definition, he can't hang out with anybody because everybody's below him. There's a great tweet recently where somebody was talking about essentially be careful. There's always going to be somebody more richer than you on social media, and it's going to make you feel bad about yourself. And like Elon has his good tweets and his bad tweets, but that was a great one where he basically replied with like, "Oh, what about me?" Like he's like the only guy where actually going on social media, nobody's richer than him, which I thought was quite funny.
It's interesting what you say there, because I completely agree with that sentiment where sometimes exactly what you say, it's good to hang out with friends who aren't obsessed about the same things as me, because suddenly we can just sit around and talk shit. And I think that that's one of the things that I've certainly missed in the last few years of my life, where the idea of sitting around with friends and sinking 10 beers, writing off the next day and just talking about absolute rubbish 10 years ago was the idea of a perfect dream. I could not have thought of a better Saturday afternoon. But now I'm thinking to myself, oh, well, you know, I'm kind of behind on an email marketing automation that I wanted to put out last week. So even my values have changed. But one of my neighbors goes surfing quite a lot. And when I look at surfing, which I'm not very good at, first of all, it's kind of a weird thing. If we were to look down on the floor and see ants next to a hose that was left on, and they're just going around in circles and jumping on a stream of water and going down and coming back, you go, these little ants are such idiots. But then you look out to the water, go, it's human ants that will go out and sit and wait for 5 minutes for a slight vibration in the water to come to create a certain wave, and then they'll just move along it and become obsessed with it. But there's that element of kind of stillness and that element of going out, being away from my phone. As far as being productive, I think I have to say to myself, this is going to be great for my thoracic extension and my overhead reach and my lat development. I almost have to get myself into the mode to think this is a productive thing to do. So I think you're absolutely right there with that balance between you need to be able to move alongside some of the people that are in the same circles as you, but sometimes you need a headwind to go up against to snap you out of it so you don't become insane, which could be one of the reasons why some of Elon's tweets are so hit and miss. Now, you mentioned the UK. I don't want to get into a slagging off contest about it. First of all, before we go into this, how is life in America away from the UK? Or shall I say, how is life in Texas? Because Texas can be seen very differently to America.
You answered I think the way you asked that question at the end is how I kind of try and describe it to people when they ask me the question of how's America, it's almost like an alien saying how's Earth. Like, it's so fucking big. Like, what do you, particularly coming from the UK, the immediate thing is people talk about, oh, it's only a 7-hour drive. Like, I don't know anybody growing up really that did a 7-hour, like to do a 7-hour drive in the UK, like that is so different. Whereas here, that's just part of Texas. So I can kind of answer the question of like, how's Austin? And I've then traveled around to different cities or different states within the US, but each part is so individualistic. So there's that nuance out the gate. But I would say like the immediate stuff that like probably the first thing I kind of realized on the ground is I've now got like a good mix of British friends and a good mix of American friends. And I find there's this weird part in the Venn diagram between the two. So the one thing I noticed in the UK, the common social vice is cynicism. So it's the cliche thing of, he got this because he knows this person, or he didn't deserve it, or she like does this, and they kind of talk about them behind the back. Whereas the common vice in the US is bullshit. So it's kind of the opposite in a way. So as a result, like my favorite people to hang out with are either down to earth Americans or ambitious Brits. Like genuinely, some of my favorite people in the world, and it's so like common now. Like I said this thing the other day of I hate British people because they criticize themselves so much. Again, like the kind of ironic thing there that, you know, that's the thing that British people are doing. There's this kind of race to the bottom now about how we can criticize the fact that we're criticizing one another. But like some of my favorite people to hang out with are British people that have managed to swim against the tide, and likewise Americans that have managed to swim against the tide of bullshit.
I was at Cooper's in Austin maybe 2 months ago, and my videographer who was with me, he's never been to Texas, so we were on a mad run. I was like, we got to see the bats, we got to get brisket, we got to do all the things, taking him through like everything you could do. We're getting very full of food, but we go to Cooper's, we're having a bit of brisket, and there's a bunch of drunk, almost like frat dudes next to us, and they're probably from Miami or something like that, and they're sat there just chatting away, whatever, and we're shoulder to shoulder, and their conversation just went quiet. And I thought, for a bit of fun, I just leant in and I went, "Where the bitches at, lads?" And they all laughed, and they're like, "Where are you from, man?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm from the UK, but I live in Australia." And we get in this conversation, and they're saying, "So what are you doing here?" And I said, "Oh, well, me and my friend have actually started a drinks business, and we're here to promote it and make content." The guy gets out his phone. He's like, "What's it called? I'm buying some right now." I was like, I've just leant over to a random bunch of dudes. I just knew it'd make them laugh. They'd eaten so much brisket, but they kind of felt like they were on a bit of a stag do. There was no way they were going out that night. And there was probably no way they were really going to go out and mix with loads of girls. And the fact that this guy got it up on his phone and went to buy it, I was like, wow, this is such a different culture to what I'm used to. Whereas I've got friends in the UK, and I won't mention them, but I'll put them on blast, where there's been times that one of them was flying back to the UK, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to upgrade this guy to business, and hopefully this motivates him forever, and he's going to be... Anyway, we launched New Tonic. 10 months later, he goes, "Mate, this drink is really good." And I didn't say thank you. I said, "Hold on. Did you just try it?" He goes, "Yeah." He goes, "TikTok did a discount, just bought a case." I went, it's been 10 months, brother. Like, how in the UK, that culture is, "Oh yeah, mate, so happy for you. Yeah, that's amazing. Won't buy it for 10 months. In America, some random dude who I sat next to eating brisket bought it in the period of about 10 seconds. So that entire mindset, when you're in an Uber, someone's talking to you, they're like, "Oh my gosh, mate, I'm going to follow you, bro. Oh, I'm going to, champion what you're doing." There is that different culture aspect. So when we look at agency, when we look at the United Kingdom, look at America, is that a contributing factor to potentially not just the culture, the direction maybe the countries are going and their political leanings at the moment?
It's a great question. You know, if you try and like go really from scratch around like human beings and cultures and societies, it's that cliche idea of if you have a human being in the jungle by himself, you've just introduced like what can only be described as a absolutely tasty bit of prey to everything around it. But you put 1,000 of us in, you've introduced the biggest predator the Earth has ever seen, because it basically comes down to our ability to cooperate and our ability to think clearly. And on the former, that naivety that the US has creates the ability to cooperate faster, because where, for example, the guy in the brisket stall that's already trying to be an angel investor into your drinks business, and listen, the failure rate may be high, but with business, you just need a few outliers that it takes over the entire economy anyway. Whereas in the UK, there's kind of that delayed response for 10 months. There was this great thing I was reading the other day around both the American and the German battle to create an atomic bomb. And the Americans underestimated apparently how hard it would be to create an atomic bomb by 100 times. But the Germans overestimated how hard it would be to create an atomic bomb by 100 times. And as a result, the Americans were the ones that created it. But as respected to like the different economies or the different way it goes, what's fascinating is I think there's a case in point that, because if you actually look at it, I would argue we have better raw ingredients than the US per capita. So like, even if you look at all the AI boom right now, I'm pretty certain, I could be mistaken, but DeepMind, for example, which came up with the Transformer paper at Google, that's a UK company. Like, so essentially the AI boom came out of the UK. Let's say we go crypto. Nobody knows who Satoshi Nakamoto is. But if you go through his white paper, guess what spelling he uses, James? Does he use the American English spelling or does he use the English spelling? He uses the correct spelling. Why we don't, actually, I said, joking to a friend the other day, why we don't just fix the British economy by rolling out a subscription service on the English language? Apart from American English, they can have that for free. But I think there's like the actual raw ingredients in the UK, I would argue in terms of talent or intellect, could actually be vastly greater than the US. But this naivety, this ability to think that the atomic bomb is 100 times easier than it actually is, makes America particularly unique.
The Bitcoin thing, it could be a red herring. You know, it could be in there to, it could be an intent. If you're smart enough to, create a cryptocurrency. I agree with you where I would say, and again, this isn't me, well, it probably is me being favorited. If you said to me, hey, mate, you're going to be going somewhere for 10 hours on a train, you can either have like a bunch of random British people or a bunch of random American people. I think I would rather the British because the banter. You famously said somewhere before, I've even quoted you before, where you say the funniest guy in the UK is probably working in like a factory somewhere, whereas in America, he's probably got a stand-up special or whatever it is. So there's so much to love about that British culture, which is why, even though I do see a bit of a downturn at the moment, I do back the resilience of the country, which is going to be great. Now, one thing I'm kind of, where you say about America and the situation they're in, I do sometimes think that maybe agency, maybe personality, maybe psychology could have some kind of background in genetics, and there could be a hereditary component to it, where if we were to look back a few hundred years about the people that were brave enough to go to foreign land and go looking for gold and to give up everything, potentially that could have some kind of component into the characteristic traits. Because when I look at people now, I think when we look at neurodiversity, I'm almost grateful for it. You need some people that are a bit more leaning towards the creative side, some people that are a bit more leaning towards the analytical side. But then I think in the same spectrum, we need an agency scale, because if everyone's high agency, you're not going to have the people that just want to slot in and be a cog. And I think some people can get really annoyed looking at high agency people accomplishing things. But I'll never forget, I dated a Norwegian girl and she lived in Norway, and I used to fly over there and see her. We dated for a few years. And her dad, he only spoke to me twice because I didn't think he spoke English. And I remember one day we were on a checkout in a supermarket, and there was this guy who looked like Thor, and he was working on the checkout. And I kind of said to him, I go, mate, what are you doing here? You're wasted. You should be playing professional sport. You should be an actor. You should be out there. And her dad said to me in like a very bad English, he goes, James, some people have very complex lives where they just need simple jobs. And I think that's all he said to me for about 6 months. And I thought, yeah, do you know what? Not everyone has to be at that top of that pyramid. Some people actually might take so much gratitude and they might actually really enjoy being at a lower level. And the hardest thing is, I had this client who used to show off about being rich. And he used to come into the gym and he'd be like, oh, left my watch on. Oh, best take that off. And then he'd go, oh, you see that, James? Engraved by Harrods. Don't worry about it. Then the strap, he would go, that's the same leather as my Rolls Royce dashboard. And I'd be like, okay, cool. And then one day he told me about one of his friends who lived in Worthing. And he goes, James, I can't understand. This guy I know, he's got nothing, lives on his own, lives in Worthing, has a dog. He goes, he's happy. I can't understand it. And I thought to myself, mate, you literally have everything. You're showing off about cars. You're wealthy beyond belief. And you're evidently rocked by a guy that you know that just lives with his dog in Worthing who's happier than you. So there's this element of some people that maybe for their, to balance the scales on the happiness, whether it's the purpose, fulfillment, need a very high amount of stuff going through. And I think that I could agree with him that sometimes I get jealous almost looking at people that don't have nothing, but they have enough. And you sometimes on a different vibration or frequency, not in like a hippie term, more so to help people understand what, because I haven't got a word for this, je ne sais quoi. How you look at other people and you go, wow, you're probably happier than I am here. And you're at this point here. And I think that that is essential for cooperation between people at all levels. Even the most blunt way of putting it, we need bosses, we need employees, we need leaders, we need followers, we need, people at different elements of that structure, where part of me wonders how much of this is genetic, how much of this is already built in. And then I suppose we get into that determinism, free will element of how people end up. What are your thoughts on the potential genetic predisposition to how people end up?
I don't know. I think it's. I think the science is still very, very early in it in certain regards. I definitely think genetics has a humongous influence on us. But I think, James, just to go back to that point, I think like I don't want to mistake this idea that getting to the top of the hierarchy is the highest agency thing that you can do. For me, it's like, and even then, being miserable is a high agency thing to do. It's that classic quote of, if you're so smart or if you're so high agency, how come you've not figured out how to make yourself happy? And I think, again, it goes back to this area that you can have agency in some areas and agencies in the other. A big part for me, which I'm trying to flesh out in the writing at the minute, is kind of what I call like alive mode versus dead mode or passive mode. And alive mode is like, again, this is a je ne sais quoi thing. Is somebody like alive behind the eyes? Because I think often you can get quote unquote high agency people that are like miserable or just kind of checked out or not there. Or you could get people who are genuinely living their like lives. They're kind of the executive producer of their own life. And if that means spending their entire time with their kids versus the awful job that they were doing, I think that's actually the higher agency thing to do, is the key thing I want to get through. I think the genetic component though, I don't know. I'd have to research that more. I don't know enough, which is and it makes a bad podcast. I should just blabber on about things I don't know, but I don't know.
Now, John, I would say the mark of someone's intelligence could be correlated with how often they could say they don't know. And so, you show your flex in there, how smart you are. Funny thing is, I hired a French-Canadian videographer, and I would use the word je ne sais quoi, and one day I'm in a taxi in Dubai. We're going somewhere to film. I went, Etienne. He goes, yeah. I go, what does je ne sais quoi mean? He goes, I don't know. I go, what do you mean you don't know? Je ne sais quoi is French. You should speak it. And I would always say, you're French. He's like, I'm not, I'm Canadian. And I'd be like, je ne sais quoi, what does it mean? He's like, I don't know. But it means I don't know. So I got in a heated argument with him. I thought je ne sais quoi meant like this thing, there's something you can't put your finger on, and I'm not sure whether or not I've been using that term correct, but it just sounds so good to say to someone. They're like, there was this beautiful woman at the bar, and she wasn't like a blonde with big boobs, but she had a she had a bit of a je ne sais quoi. She had a bit of energy to her. And this guy who speaks French is kind of sitting there going, he's not using that word right.
That's a great point. That's just on that point, though. There's this idea called like the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, which is how language shapes how we think. And it weirdly tangentially related to the genetic side of thing that you asked them. Both culture and language completely shape the way we think. Because if you actually looked at the raw genetic info of the UK and the US, you could argue you had that historical A/B test when the boats came, like this Darwinian, all the higher agency, more likely to take a risk left. There is that potential argument. But also, what wouldn't explain it is, why do you see such lower agency cultures and higher agency cultures? If it's just this random genetic mutation, you'd kind of see this even distribution. But you don't. You seem to see an extreme difference between the two. Because both, weirdly, culture obviously massively shapes us. And weirdly, as you mentioned there, like language, the ability to access certain words. I have a friend of mine who's Swedish, and he talks about how in Sweden, you can, like, he can't describe things in English the same way because he can move words around. So him as a writer, it completely impacts the way that he creates things. So it's a really fucking fascinating question of, you have the genetic thing over here, you have the cultural thing over here, and then even the language that me and you use. How much of who me and James are is just because we learn the English language, versus if we kept almost everything the same, but we were speaking and thinking in Spanish, how different we would be.
Just a quick one. If you're currently writing your own workouts and you're getting a little bit bored of it, or you fancy being held accountable, I have one of the world's largest online training communities. It's called affordableonlinecoaching.com because it's online coaching that's affordable. I don't expect you to take my word for it that it's any good. If you download our app, you can get a 1-week free trial where we'll even write you a program. And to be perfectly honest, you could just screenshot it and run off with it. But the majority of people don't, and they have a great time training with us. So if you want us to write your workouts and take control of all of that for you, please head to affordableonlinecoaching.com for more information. Apparently Russians have got words that can almost take a full sentence and they've just put it into one word, especially when talking about depressing and sad things. There can be, I think there's one word, I can't remember what it was called, but it means like experiencing pain so severe that it's crippling to your life. And they just have a word for it. And here's a weird tangent. I spoke about this on another podcast. My TikTok feed at the moment is about brutalist architecture in the Soviet Union. Now, I'm not sure how I ended up here. I'm not an architect's fan at all, but there's something just cold about the concrete and the buildings. And I was speaking to Will Storr about this, how we were talking about Eastern and Western cultures and how they perceive I and we as a group, and how they would use architecture to impact someone's feeling sense of individualism. So it was about stripping everyone from feeling like they were an individual and that they were just a cog in a machine. So where you say there about people of different agency, we then have different cultures that then will impact their people, not just with language, but with actual architecture and buildings and the way that they'll segment their housing, that you're all going to be in an apartment where you can't change your garden, you can't have a flower bed, you can't do anything. You're all going to have the exact same amount of square footage. And I'm not sure if it's from playing Call of Duty back in the day, and you have that map in Chernobyl, which made me just want to go to see, Ukraine, where the radioactive zone is. There's like a weird part of me that's obsessed a little bit with not just Soviet architecture, but like abandoned buildings, like Japan, for instance. We could talk about the agent, and you've kind of stumped me here with the agency thing, because now I think there could be almost a bell curve to agency where maybe the middle of the curve is high achievers. And maybe, so we've almost got a Dunning-Kruger effect here where you've got quote unquote low agency. Then in the middle, you've got I'm high agency, I'm making loads of money, I'm killing it, I'm crushing it. Then you get past that Dunning-Kruger bell curve element. Then at the end, the real meta God tier agency king is doing nothing because he realizes happiness trumps productivity. So completely stumped there. But back to the Soviet architecture, abandoned buildings, Japan. I really want to go look at these like abandoned theme parks and abandoned villages. The reality is this has got to be one of the saddest things in the world to see population decline and collapse over in those regions. But then that would tie me into the discussion of, would agency play a positive or potential negative effect on birth rates? Because we could argue that some of our highest agency friends, quote unquote, would be so high agency in their professional life. But when it comes to something like starting a family, having kids, you can have two different standards at the same time.
Now, it's a bell curve again, right? At the far end of the extreme, you've got the sperm donors that are having like 732 kids at a time. So yeah, it's an interesting one. Does does an increase in agency uh, impact the like fertility rate? I don't know. Again, I haven't looked into that enough to say whether that's. I think most likely would be correlation necessarily. I wouldn't know. The architecture point though, James, just to harp back onto that, I think an interesting one. And I think you can kind of go macro there, right? Like it's like Russia, or it's where Japan builds buildings. But an interesting one is even at the micro level, some of the highest agency people I know, they like design their own environment. So that you go in, like I'm in Chris's room right now, and it's like it's a Chris Williamson room. It stinks of the man. Like he's little touches, little attention to detail. So designing your own environment there just at the local level and designing your own language as well. I think you do that quite well. Like you'll have like specific terms that you use that I haven't heard before, or like specific words that you've kind of created. Whereas we kind of outsource that naturally to our environment, which I think is quite a strange thing. But the English language was just created by people like me and you. But we often wait for a word to come for us rather than trying to bring it into existence.
There's something, if you're spending a lot of time writing, I wonder, you're a much more competent writer than I, but sometimes when I'm typing away on my computer,
books, my friend.
So far. Yeah. You never know. My fall off could be coming. It could be the bell curve. I could be going into the meta high agency stratosphere of doing absolutely nothing for the next 5 years. When you're sometimes writing, do you ever find that words just appear? And I have to go away and check them to see whether or not I've got it right. Now, if I've got it right, I feel like I'm some kind of absolute genius. I'm there. I feel like telling it to people. I'm like, hey guys, I've just discovered the word idiosyncrasy and I don't know where it came from. And I just used it perfectly in a sentence. So again, our ability to absorb things, words from the outside, even on a subconscious level, let alone conscious, shocks me. But that room you're in, for me, it was like going into a museum in Chris's house, because Chris and I have got a very good business relationship, I would say. I would say we have a good understanding of each other, which is why we actually don't fall out. We bicker all the time, but we don't fall out. And going into that house was incredible for me because I wanted to see the environment of arguably one of my highest agency friends. Now, it was clean, it was organized, it was a much nicer space than before. But that room you're in there was fascinating. I turned to Declan, my videographer, I go, film everything. Because I know the amount of scrutiny that's gone into the waffle on the light. You've got these little boards up top, you've got soft lights, you've got hair lights, you've got the camera, which gets better every time I see him. Now, the great part is I spent 4 minutes in that room, and already I've mimicked so many of the things that I've seen from his setup because I know his ability to detail. I know that if it wasn't crucial, that it wouldn't be in there. And there's kind of a very good inspirational, and there's a paradox here, which I coined once, not very well. I called it like the hater inspiration paradox, where when you see something better than you, whether it be a physical setup of a studio, whether it be someone's competency, whether anything else, you can only really go two ways. You can either be inspired or you can hate. Because being inspired means you have to do the work and you have to do the yards and reps, sets, whatever it is, to get to that outcome. But hating is the easier option by default because then all you have to do is be negative. So from a kind of perspective of where that might sit with agency, how do we decipher and get people to understand the point that you could all too easily be inspired by someone rather than feeling negative towards it? What's going on there in your opinion?
Oh, so it weirdly kind of relates back to what you said with your friend earlier, like the British and American reaction, right? One saw something and kind of reacted positively. One saw something and reacted negatively. I mean, there's a great meme that's kind of semi-related, which is, have you ever seen the bus meme where it's like two guys on a bus, one's like looking out and it's super like pessimistic on one end, and then the other's looking out and it's super optimistic at the other end. And what I love about it is obviously there's two like classic interpretations of it. You've got the optimistic one where you can kind of, but even look at people you like deeply disdain and still go, oh, that's a nugget there. Versus what a lot of people do, like people they like, particularly friends, and I think it's particularly people that are closer to them, because we have mimetic rivalries, I think, with people so that are much closer to us. So, for example, if I see a guy playing rugby on it, England, for example. I don't feel like a mimetic rivalry thing because I never grew up playing rugby, really. I don't know who this guy is. But then when I actually go, oh, that guy was in the year above me at school, then there's this kind of desire to take it down. And as a result, it's such a negative sum game because they don't get anything out of the interaction. They're just almost getting a hater out of the interaction. And then you're just getting more bitter and spending the time thinking about them. But to go back to the bus meme, the beautiful thing there is you have the kind of optimistic interpretation of it and the pessimistic interpretation of it. But there's a great sub-meme to that meme, which is you was never, like, basically the choice is be the pessimist that's looking out and seeing the doom and gloom, or the optimist that's seeing the beautiful sunset. But the real meta is that you was just seeing that in the wind mirror all along. You was the bus driver. You had like agency over it. So this kind of idea of like the optimistic or pessimistic interpretation is kind of a fallacy. It ultimately comes down to the agentic route. And I think looking at people that you admire and trying to figure out what they do. And also, James, that within that, there's sometimes things you look at people you admire and you go, fuck, I actually don't want that part. And again, that's where it's having agency. If you just go in and blankly copy and paste another individual, first off, I don't think it works necessarily that well. You, like all great artists, you have to remix it. You have to put your own spin on things. But if you're just doing it because you want to be that person, but you can't be that person at an individual level, that's just a low agency trap in disguise as well. So there's like different levels to it there. One, you have to take that, what utility you can take out of other people. But also if you just blank copy and paste it, I think that's a recipe both for low agency and for misery.
There's a kind of a bit of an agency trap, which I've fallen into a little bit, but not too bad, where let's say over the last 3-4 years, I've become quote unquote more high agency, trying to get more done. I think that age is a factor. You know, I was living in London at 29. I can go have gin and tonics on Clapham Common at 29, that's fine. But I was back there a few months ago at 36, and I've realised that I used to be an older young person, but now I'm a younger old person. And there's a big difference. I went into number 32 in Clapham. I was like, I'm old. This is full of kids. There are children around me, 18, 19-year-olds. So then that age factor is, I've always felt like I'm young. Now I'm like, no. You know, I'm only maybe 20 years away from never being given a mortgage because I'm too old. You know, you're not going to get a 30-year mortgage at 50 because you're going to be dead. So you have all these kind of stresses in life. And then there's the pending one about having children, which again is another factor. So you got age as in I've only got a finite amount of time and energy. And also the 5 years between 30 and 35 are like 20 years between 15 and 35. The acceleration or deceleration in energy and ability to function on 5 hours sleep, whatever, forces you, it crams you into that hole of becoming more high agency. But there's a trap within that I've discovered where when I was younger, 24, when I was broke, when I was a PT doing 6 hours of PT a day and living at home with my parents, I would do things every week that made me happy. So it would be going out, getting smashed with my friends, probably doing one too many bumps of cocaine, whatever it was, doing a pill in vodka revs in Reading. Like I would never say it's acceptable to do half a pill of MDMA in a bar, but vodka revs in Reading was our like free reign place where there'd be disco tunes on, whatever. So even though I'd be feeling like crap, we used to call it Suicide Tuesdays, which is a really bad thing to call it, but pretty much the worst thing about any use or abuse of MDMA is the next day you don't feel too bad, but it creeps up on you on Tuesday. Saturday night, Tuesday's going to get you. So if you're irrational, snappy, or make really short judgments, it's because of that. Anyway, back to the point. When I've become busier, and sometimes I can take busyness and just tell myself it's agency, high agency, high agency. Are you overworking and doing too much? No, mate. I'm a high agency individual. I'm getting stuff done. Sometimes your calendar is full of so many tasks and things you need to do, albeit dopamine rewarding, that I'll get to the end of a period and go, what did I do to make myself happy? And I think that I've actually taken a step back in some respects where I used to swim in the sea every day. And now I could go a week without swimming in the sea and I live on the beach because I've got work to do, because I'm trying to get stuff done. And it got to a point maybe a few weeks ago that I was like, close the laptop lid, go down the beach, have a swim. You have misconstrued doing what needs to be done for work and what needs to be done for happiness. And I've always said like mental health and happiness is, it's like a table that needs to be propped up with many legs. And I found that I'm into an agency trap where sometimes I overlook things that contribute to happiness as a low agency activity?
So many jumping on points there, James. Like, I feel like we're getting right into the meat and veg of like what I've been thinking about a lot of late. So the way, rather than saying high agency people, low agency people, first off, I personally prefer when we're talking about the latter, low agency traps. Because when you're in a state of low agency, that's kind of how you feel. You feel trapped in something and you don't necessarily know what to do. And within low agency traps, there's so many different ones that exist. So in the original essay that I did, I kind of presented them humorously in the sense of like the text message thread of, hey, mate, I'm stuck in this jail. Any updates on breaking me out? And coming at it from all the different traps that exist and how they would reply. So even going back to a thing where we've had a few bits on here today, like one of the things that that question then brings out is one of the traps that I call the vague trap, which is we have a lot of, like, I'm sure we have a lot of people that we know, both of us probably fall into this, where you're quite vague with things. Even the term like high agency, low agency, when I go into like 15 different traps within low agency, me and you can then point at the different individual ones and go, oh, okay, like James has no problem with like a bias to action. So some people may have like an inaction trap, like they just can't take action for whatever reason. But for you, it might be that you're in the busy trap and that you're potentially addicted to being busy. So there's two traps that I particularly think of. So one, I think like the meta trap is the high agency trap, which is when you're creating a definition of high agency based off whether it's an insecurity of yours or what you want to please to other people or prove to other people is itself another form of low agency. It's like it's a chameleon that's disguised itself there, James. And then the two sub-related ones, I think, particularly for more people who want to be high agency, is both the busy trap and the grind trap. So the grind trap first, I always use this amazing story of, have you ever heard about the man who tried to make a chicken sandwich from scratch?
No, tell me more.
Right. So good. So it's this YouTuber called Andy George from How to Make Everything. And Andy George tries to make a chicken sandwich from scratch, which again, you think, oh, I've made a chicken sandwich from scratch, George. What are you on about? No, I mean like literally from scratch. Like get the entire ingredients, make like go all the way there. So the whole video goes through him getting the wheat for the bread, planting the wheat for the bread, harvesting the wheat for the bread, flying into the ocean to get salt. Like all these bits of details you don't think about going into a chicken sandwich. He sits down, James, and he bites into this chicken sandwich and he goes, it's slightly underwhelming. So this slightly underwhelming sandwich, a sandwich that me and you, if we got from a restaurant, would probably ask for a refund, cost him $1,500 to make and took 6 months of the man's life. And so this is the kind of metaphor for when we try and grind our way, which I think is a high agency trap, which is you think that you can do everything by yourself rather than like delegating to other people, using other people, or using technology. And even in that example, Andy didn't grind enough. Like if you really wanted to make a chicken sandwich from scratch without any knowledge from other human beings, without any use of technology, without any assistance from any other human being, and he was just a blank slate born onto this earth that had to figure things out, I genuinely think it would take the length of the entire span of humanity for him, but longer than that, because it took humanity 99.99% of our history to make the chicken sandwich. We only did it 150 years ago. And that's with all those factors there. So this humility that you have when you see a chicken sandwich in a shop, whether you should break down in tears of joy or tears of sadness, that you'd never make it alone. So I think that's the grind trap there. And then the busy trap is another one there where it's this kind of anxiety condition where I need to be high agency, therefore I'm going to be busy. But if you haven't got around to identifying the problem that you want to solve, then I think, again, that's just another low agency trap in disguise where you're outsourcing your sense of self to this person, an insecure version of you wants to be, or you're just wanting to be busy. And we live in this time now where everybody says, it's a cliche, and I do it. It's a very British thing to do, which is me and James are catching up. It's like, oh, mate, how have you been? Yeah, I'm super busy. What about you? Yeah, super busy as well. And it's this kind of status signal that we're like doing things. But you know who never says that? Firefighters, nurses. They're just exhausted. But it's us like that are like people on Slack that are there's this stat recently of tech workers change context switch communication channels every 6 minutes. We're the ones that are like constantly busy. And I think those are both low agency traps under the meta of like a high agency trap, that you're trying to be what you think high agency is without really thinking about what you want and how you want to spend your time.
Yeah, do you know what? I feel like I should pay for this conversation at the end. I feel personally attacked. So I want to talk about cognitive dissonance in a second. Interesting there what you said, and also I want to talk cognitive dissonance, having kids. Don't let me forget those. But what you said about 99% of humanity being around before the chicken sandwich makes me think that there was a human skull found recently, which points back to maybe being 1,000,000 years old. Do you see that? So can't remember where it was. Probably Joe Rogan screenshotted it and put it as Instagram. So this is legit evidence. But I decided to comment on that and say, oh, human beings have been around 1,000,000 years. Isn't it crazy that all our religious characters turned up so late? That they were watching for such a huge amount of time of human existence, just watching barbaric scenes of humans drowning at sea, killing each other, tearing people apart with their hands. Then it's almost like they wanted to wait until the very, 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 very last chapter, the finite part of the last chapter, and suddenly appear just in one little part of the world. You know, I'm pretty sure that I saw something online where someone was making this argument. He was like, they were a lot more advanced in China. In the East, they had like so much more technological advances, but it wasn't there that they came to. They went to somewhere else. And the further back we can prove humanity, it just goes to show at that point, maybe 2,000 years ago, people that were writing in the Bible and whatever were probably thinking to themselves, oh, we're early. You know, humanity's probably only 100 years old. We're here. But the more further back we go, the kind of the likeliness of any of that being real just elongates and gets there. And there's a point I like to make to anyone that I talk to about it, because some people, I feel like religion's coming back, like it's cool again. I think it was Duncan Trussell on Rogan talking about the fact they've been to church or whatever. So, you know, there's probably about 30 million people in America that are about to start going to church. But the further back we get those archaeological finds. So, yeah, the chicken sandwich, religion, I'm not sure which one came first as a ratio of humanity. So what you say about this agency trap, I feel personally attacked, but at the same time, amazed to hear it, because there'll be a lot of people listening feeling the same. One of the most grateful things I am to having a son who is like 1.5, is you snap out of these agency traps, because I'll be there being busy. I'll be in the busy trap and I'll be doing things. And having my son walk past makes me realize, headphones out, you know, what am I doing? Why am I going to such extremes to get a thumbnail right? My son's home. He's just been at the park. I'm going to go hang with him for a bit. I feel that there's a kind of intertwined trap there. People that high agency, busy trap, etc., can't have kids now because I don't have the time to do it. I haven't even got time to see my friends. How am I going to have kids? The worst thing for them would be having children, but then it's also the best thing for them, paradoxically, because there is nothing more pure that I've ever experienced in my life to snap out of that. Because if your world is your laptop in front of you, your Stripe account, your followers, and your sales, which has been mine for a long time, nothing is more important. So of course you're going to get caught up with that world. But having a child means that there is something infinitely more important that you would die for walking in the house. So for so many people that might be not having children for agency are actually overlooking one of the biggest agency hacks that could ever be there, which brings me into this cognitive dissonance where so many of us, I think, probably know this, but if you are someone that is able to write incredible articles, grow on LinkedIn, market a business, create social media, grow a following, if you're good enough to convince strangers that you're a good person, you're intelligent enough to lie to yourself, to keep yourself in that trap, to allure yourself that you're in the right place.
Wow. I go back to have you ever read any David Deutsch, James?
Maybe, I don't know.
So David Deutsch has kind of created quantum computing, extremely bright guy. And a lot of the agency work is directly linked to a lot of his philosophies. And it's a difficult read. It took me about 2 years to like fully digest the book. And now with LLMs, I think going in there and saying, hey, one of the biggest LLM hacks I recommend is taking a bit of material and saying, Elon Musk has this idea of like the semantic tree. where he talks about the way most of us learn knowledge is we kind of imagine knowledge is like a tree that starts from the roots, and then you have the trunk, and then you have the primary branches and the secondary branches. Like, I don't know jiu-jitsu that well, but from my friends who do, they talk about there's the initial like basics of like human leverage that you kind of learn in the initial classes. And then you kind of stack further and further complexity on there. Whereas the way a lot of us approach like learning knowledge is we turn up and we're trying to learn like a flying armbar out the gate. Whereas actually, like, Elon's argument is that you try and learn from the roots of the tree. So you try and find what's the most foundational idea first. So taking that book and putting it in there and applying that all the way there, and like, okay, what is the foundational idea here? And his essential idea is that basically all human progress, both in our individual lives as well as our societal, technological lives, essentially comes down to a rough rule of thumb of if a problem doesn't defy the laws of physics, it's solvable. Doesn't mean you are going to solve it. You may spend your entire life not being able to solve it. But what we kind of keep coming back to here is we'll point at work problems where you find no problem, or certain type A personalities have no problem solving, but then they can't turn that agency into another form. And I love the point you said then around having children. And it's an idea I've kind of been relating around about how there's a lot of low agency traps, I think, come from neuroticism. It comes from getting in our own way a lot, both from the people who necessarily aren't doing the thing or are doing the thing too much that it's no longer becoming the thing. And Huberman had this great thing the other day, which was neuroticism is directly linked to your inability to compartmentalize. And I don't have a kid yet, but I played around with different compartmentalization techniques. And I think a child is the ultimate compartmentalization technique, because come 5 p.m., if James hasn't got everything done by then and the kid's coming home from school, you like that, talk about an absolute deadline that you've got to hit. Versus when you don't have that as a single person, you can easily just not be able to compartmentalize things. And likewise, having the reference point of, you know what, I'm not the most important person in the world. I have this child now, again, helps you compartmentalize your problems.
I hope that you're enjoying the episode. Just over a year ago, I started using a TRT service. I was suffering with low libido, low mood, and low energy. And I've since invested into Manual, one of the UK's leading TRT and weight loss services. And if you want to find out more about what they do and how they can help, head to manual.co/Smith. There'll be a link in the description below this video. Right, let's get back to the episode. There's a Parkinson's law, which is pretty much any amount of time you give to a task, it takes that long to complete. And I would agree with that till the 5 p.m, coming home, whatever it is. And I think that's amazing. Some people get so much benefit from just having a stopwatch where I'm going to write for 30 minutes, phone down, whatever it is. However, there is another Dunning-Kruger bell curve to this again, where you bring the child in and the child becomes the most important thing, but then cognitive dissonance comes along and you go, well, when the child goes to bed, I now need to work more because I'm needing to pay down the mortgage. I definitely have this existential anxiety now that if I'm to die, maybe drowning, going for a surf, maybe what kills me is trying to be less high agency. Who knows? There's a lot of different paradoxes and intertwining things here going on that I wouldn't want to leave a mortgage to someone. So you can go from just dealing with yourself, child comes along, fantastic, I've got a reason to stop working. But then that existential anxiety comes along that there are people I need to provide for now. So I just need enough to pay down the mortgage. Average house price in the UK, £250,000. Average house price in Sydney is about £800,000. The only place more expensive than Sydney is Hong Kong. So cool, we got that. Then school fees, cool, just had that. You know, enough money to see yourself through to 18. There is always going to be at the end of that curve another set of anxieties that could all too easily be packaged up like in The Big Short. What are they called? The bonds that the bad bonds they put together,
subprime mortgages.
Subprime mortgages. So you can almost take those anxieties, package them together and make them look like AAA stock of integrity, providing, looking after someone. So really, this entire thing is just a roller coaster of ups and downs. It's probably what made humanity what it is today is the same way that we can create so many excuses for doing too much, not doing enough, caring too much, not caring enough. Really, we're a very complex ape that will create its own problems and fixate on them for very long periods of time. I'm not sure where these bell curves finish, because every time we get to the end, I'm able to add another one onto the end of it.
Never ends.
No wonders.
It's that there's this classic Zen monk story, and he's talking about how um, after like a year of meditation, he sat down and said, "Oh, I finally figured everything out." And then after 2 years, he goes, "Oh, me at the 1 year mark was an absolute idiot. I've now finally figured everything out." 4 year, same thing. 16 year, and he's there on his deathbed going, "I finally figured everything out." And it's this idea that no, you like it's a never ending game. It's a never ending challenge. And even David Deutsch's idea that in theory, it like the universe, it kind of expands for like um, an infinite end. Same with our problem solving capabilities, like and the problems that we have. So even as we solve a problem, James, a new problem gets invented. So, for example, let's say we solve the problem of having heating in our house by using the fire and having a chimney. Sorry, let's say we don't have a chimney, then we have smoke in the house. So then we need to invent the chimney. And I go, now we've got a new problem. I need to figure out who's going to clean the chimney. You know what I mean? And I go, okay, now I've got to figure out a way to pay the chimney people. Now I need to find a way of having it, and it's never ending. Basically, the definition of a human being is a problem solver. And the biggest, I mean, probably a low agency trap is thinking that once I get to the end of this problem, all my problems will go away, versus getting into the frame of I actually enjoy being a problem solver.
You know, what you say there is a beautiful encapsulation of jiu-jitsu. There's, you suck when you begin. My best advice to people is, hey, yeah. They're like, what advice have you got for a white belt? I'm like, just be prepared to be shit for 2 years. And by giving them that advice, the people that will become black belts will go, yeah, okay, cool. I'll suck for 2 years. That's fine. The people that were never really going to make their way will go, no, sounds like too much hard work. And they'll exit there. But when you compete in jiu-jitsu, it's a weird thing because you're going to go fight a stranger. Now, the personality traits of jiu-jitsu athletes, very much like rugby players, where they're big, strong people, but underneath are the kindest people ever. And another little subcategory of that is there's nothing crazier. Ryan Holiday always talks about how your imagination is always worse than real life. I think there's something in one of his books where he talks about they hear a pack of wolves or a pack of something over and they look over and it was only two making all the noise. Your fears and your imagination are much worse than reality could ever be. I just butchered that, but whatever. But you get a taste. This is why people love jiu-jitsu, in my opinion. They get a taste of that because when you go to compete, you get put into a random pen. So you're literally put in a holding pen like cattle. Then two names get read out and you've got to go fight a stranger. And at that moment when your heart's beating, you think they're going to try and kill you. They're going to try and tear your ACL in front of your children. Like, then afterwards, win or lose, you shake hands. You're like, oh my God, that's one of the nicest people I've ever met. But the other thing is you don't have to compete. No one's making you do it. No one's going to think less of you. It's very easy to get a black belt without ever once competing. So it's almost that trolley analogy of whether or not you put the trolley away when no one's watching, whether or not you compete when no one asks you to. Then when you get the footage of competing, the day you watch it, irrespective of how you do, you're proud because it was the best you could do on the day. You're not going to look at yourself and beat yourself up going, oh, that omoplata or a back take was awful, because you don't know any better. But the weird thing is that when you go back and look at footage, so I'm a brown belt now, if I look at purple, blue, white, I'm disgusted. I can't believe it. I'm looking at someone that I cannot believe is me. I'm thinking, how did you not know that? I'm beating myself up about it. Similar to, I'm sure, if you look back at any of your old writing or interviews or clips, this could be an agency thing where if you have a certain rate of acceleration and competence acquisition, there becomes a point, whether it's 3 months, 3 weeks, or 3 years, where you almost become disgusted with previous versions of yourself, whether it be competence in jiu-jitsu, whether it be competence in something else. But it almost becomes a beautiful part of the journey where you look at a version of yourself that you are appalled with, but at the time on that day, you were impressed with. It is a weird trajectory that goes through time, similar to space-time, where there's no avoiding it. There's no way around it. There's no true way to be genuinely happy with your previous efforts. And I think it's those comparisons that people can get between life and jiu-jitsu that makes it such an important sport to them, because I bet your friends are obsessed with it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. I have a few different, one of my best friends, Josh, is like the deepest I know into jiu-jitsu. I think, on your point, that there's a great book called The Gap and the Gain. I don't know if you ever heard of it. And essentially the core thing, you know what? I was once at dinner with Chris and we'd done mushrooms like 18 months ago. And then we did mushrooms again that day. And we was talking at dinner, and we was at that point kind of mellowing down. And I was talking about how I enjoyed who I am and how I treated myself so much more when I was on the mushrooms that day versus maybe sometimes the self that you was describing earlier, where you're being like, oh, you're not good enough, based even judging your past version that you've now evolved from, like beating that past version up, even though you, by definition, you've come past it. And he said this book, The Gap of the Game. And I read it, and it's phenomenal. And essentially, it has this idea. It's a difficult skill. It's definitely easier said than done. But essentially, has this idea that the way most of us operate is we measure ourselves in the gap. So we look at where James is now, and the never expanding, infinite version that you can dream of right now, which is probably you with your black belt, or you with this amount paid off on the mortgage, or whatever it is. And as you've experienced, it keeps getting nearer and nearer. And it keeps moving further and further away. So you're constantly in this gap. Versus the kind of way they describe it is trying to constantly get yourself into the game. So when you're reviewing that jiu-jitsu footage, it's like, shit, look how good, look how much better I've got. Like how amazing is that? And trying to treat yourself. I think the cliche thing is how, and again, easier said than done, of how do you go about treating yourself like a best friend? Because I think even the scenarios you were describing earlier with yourself, like you wouldn't treat your best friend that way. And again, you don't get into binary thinking of like, oh yeah, but what am I going to do then, mate? Just give up the business and just chill on the beach all day. And I think no, you wouldn't do that to your best friend either. But I think you'd acknowledge when your best friend needs a break. But again, how do we apply that? I've struggled with this answer for ages. And I came up with an idea the other day that went semi-viral, which is whenever you have a problem. Again, this is the attachment trap. So like, how do we get out the attachment trap? Whenever you have a problem, just go, okay, forget about James for a second, forget about George for a second. And it's your friend Mike, imaginary friend Mike, who tells you this exact problem. And then you've just got to describe it to Mike, look after Mike, go, hey, Mike, I think you need to do da-da-da-da-da, da-da-da-da-da. And then Mike goes, mate, I'm just sick today. Do you mind doing it for me? And then you kind of just act out the script that you've built for Mike. And even then, as you're doing it, you go, no, it's just for Mike. And it's this healthy like detachment that prevents yourself from getting in your own way. But there's a big disclaimer here, which is if you're called Mike, this doesn't work. So you've got to have a friend called George or James.
There's a much worse version of what you just said, which is when I used to write my own workouts. I used to write them for someone else, then do them. So if I wrote it for myself, it would have all the things I want and none of the stuff I needed to do. But if I wrote a workout for someone else, it would look vastly different. I had those kind of double standards with those. There's a very famous clip I saw of Jordan Peterson where a woman's husband had killed himself and she was experiencing a lot of guilt. And he said to her, okay, if your best friend's husband killed himself, would you blame his wife? She goes, no, never in a million years. And he said, why'd you blame yourself? If you're not willing to blame others of the same thing, then why are you willing to blame yourself? And it took me a long time to kind of digest that and absorb that exactly off the same note as you. We treat ourselves with an incredibly different standard. We almost walk around with the biggest blind spot ever, even to the point where if someone was to say, you know, what's Chris bad at? You know, being on time, you know, holding eye contact. No, I'm joking. Like, so many different things, you know, probably, you know, loves AG1 a little bit too much. You could pick them all out. And then someone goes, okay, what are your flaws? You kind of left thinking, it becomes a very difficult introspective thing to see where your own issues are. We have almost a better competency to help and judge others than we do to ourselves. And that must be a downfall.
Got something on that, Jay. That's so true. I think, the first thing is when you have bad breath, like you're the only person in the room that knows that doesn't know you have bad breath. So we weirdly have this distortion when it comes to ourselves, like actually judging ourselves. The best, or one of the best ideas I've had related to this is this old talk, really underrated, old talk Warren Buffett's doing. And he's kind of sat there, college campus, I think it's University of Pennsylvania. And the kids are asking him questions. And you get obviously the cliche thing of like, how do I be rich like you, Warren? And it's rather than give the cliche of like, oh, well, you need to work hard and wait for compound interest to take over. He comes at it with this, attacking this issue that we're talking about. And he says, so what I advise you do is get out of your own head for a second and look around at everybody else in the room, your friends that you know, your peers that you know. And if you had to invest in them, so you're going to put an investment in them and you're going to get 10% of their earnings for the rest of their life, who would you pick and why? And you probably think about this question now. I can think about this question now. And you sit there and you go, oh, I'd probably pick Mike for this reason. I'd pick Jane because she, you know what, she's so diligent when it comes to being proactive about her career choices. And you kind of go down the list. And then he goes, those are your values that you want to establish for yourself. And it's like, how do you then take those that you've seen in other people where we can see things, we can smell the bad breath really clearly in other people and apply them? And then he builds on this idea greater, which is he then flips it around and says, also look at who you would short and establish why. And those are your kind of values to run away from. And again, there's like a cliche or a cynic trap you can fall into of, oh yeah, is life just about making money? And again, no. This is why I love this metaphor, is that if you don't care about money at all, that's your agency, that's your choice. You know what, I don't care about money. The whole thing's a giant scam. It's been invented to just control us. Great. But whatever you do care about, you can use the same thing. So imagine some weird currency related to everybody's health. You go, okay, if you could invest in friends' health and get 10% of their outcome for the rest of time, who would you pick and why? Shorting as well. Who would you pick and why? Same with happiness. There has to be an obvious disclaimer there. And Buffett says this, which is you can't just pick the one who has rich parents. You can't just pick the one that's won the lottery. It has to come from merit. So, and I love that metaphor because it gets you out of your own head, judging other people. Daniel Kahneman, who wrote Thinking Fast and Slow, the guy who basically created cognitive biases, who won a Nobel Prize for observing cognitive biases in other people. And he concluded his career with the biggest lesson that I had is that learning about cognitive biases doesn't prevent you from making cognitive biases. It's so much easier to see mistakes in other people than ourselves.
Yeah, it's crazy. I loved Thinking Fast and Slow. It's almost one of the most impactful and, dare I say it, driest books ever. So it was a difficult read, but reading it, I was learning so much. And actually, that and The Art of Thinking Clearly by Rolf Dobelli formed so much of my writing over the following few years. It's crazy that a book that I really struggled to get through helped me so much with things like loss aversion, where loss aversion's played such a big part in so many of my talks because it's funny to make things that people can understand out of it. And the more I look into loss aversion, especially tax avoidance or tax, what's the one you're allowed to do though? Yeah, tax avoidance, that's fine. It's tax fraud that you're not allowed to do. You're allowed to avoid paying tax as long as it's legal. Or is it, there's a different term for it. Evasion. Yeah, there's evasion and avoidance. It's a bit like incident, accident, hot fuzz. Well, why did you call it an incident? Oh, well, an accident says there's someone to blame. And so people would never go to a bank and steal $10,000, but they would shave it off their tax bill. People are much more inclined to behave badly to avoid a loss than they are to get the equivalent gain. And really getting people to tie into that. I've got a friend of mine who I was moaning about tax, and he gets his phone out. He shows me a tax bill for over $2 million for the last year. And he just laughs. And he said to me, if you put that energy into earning more money instead of avoiding the tax, you would be so much happier. And I knew he was right. I had written about this in books. I'd spoken about it at talks, but the exact same thing happened then. I was almost creating a narrative in my mind that was almost hypocritical of the whole entire thing. And exactly what you say there, just because you know so much about agency doesn't mean that you can't fall into the exact same agency traps as anyone else. So what I want to ask you would be, for anyone out there listening, what agency hacks could there be, should there be, or have you discovered that they could implement into their life? Is there any low-hanging fruit? So when people, what I would love to think is that, say someone listens to a podcast, they get to the end and they go, cool, how can I take that from a thought, something I've listened to and something I resonated with, to actually manifesting itself into their life for the better?
Yeah, if you like actual tangible stuff. So again, it depends on the trap you're in. So I'll go through a few different things. I think, let's say you're in the vague trap where you have a problem, you think you've got a problem, but can't quite describe it, and it's a bit all over the place. Or you're in the rumination trap where you're kind of just looping on that problem for years and years and years and years and years and years. One thing I like, the lowest hanging fruit I genuinely recommend is, I think we can increase the global economy by 2 to 3% annually just by installing large whiteboards in everybody's home. So there's something about getting basically vagueness and rumination, they exist inside of your head. And the act of transformation, whether it's speaking something out loud, it's one of the reasons I think if you actually had to look at one of the biggest benefits of therapy, genuinely think a lot of it is just using your mouth to transform words outside of your head and then hearing them out loud, which you wouldn't do if you was another person. Likewise, with a whiteboard, actually drawing out a problem. It's that Kidlin's law, which is actually defining a problem is 50% of the way of solving the problem. And the biggest thing we don't do with problems is define it. And our working memory is like 7 things, 5 to 9. Like it's 5 to 9. And we try and solve our biggest problems inside of our head. So the actual act of transformation, whether that's writing things down, talking it out loud, building a spreadsheet, is the biggest way out of the vague and the rumination trap. You could also get giant Post-it notes that you can stick to walls as well that are phenomenal. And my friend Henrik Carlson has this great line, which is, before you solve a problem, you must understand a problem. And when you have it out, even if you write down, it's one of the biggest things in cognitive behavioral therapy, if you write down a page about the problem, again, it goes back to the working memory. If we forget, the problem with forgetting things is we don't realize how many things we forget, because by definition, we've forgotten them. The average person, here's a question, James. The average person has about 50 to 70,000 thoughts per day. Could you name like a clear sentence from yesterday?
No, not at all. I forget what day it is.
So getting it out of the head is so important. I'd say other like weird little language hacks, like talking like super low hanging fruit right now, like weird little language hacks. One, even though I've used the word problem a lot, trying to use the word puzzle more. Weirdly, when I say problem, I feel this sense of anxiety that kind of comes in my body a bit. Whereas when I say puzzle, my prefrontal cortex activates. It feels a bit more like a game. I think using the word experiment rather than decision is such a powerful tool that I began to use, because the way my mind would work, and I think a lot of people have this, particularly type A people, when they come out like a big decision of like, should I move to Austin or not? Or should I start this business or not? What tends to happen is if you actually, again, this is where the self-awareness comes in, like really actually observing the thought for a second. The way a lot of it works, or particularly what's in my mind, is it will project out different horror films. But it will usually, when thinking of moving cities, will skip to me 2 years in the future. I've been moved to Austin and everything's gone wrong. All my people back home have fallen out of me. They don't no longer talk to me. Can't afford rent because the Trump's another money machine and like hyperinflation's kicked in. The US has gone to war with Canada because they tried to make the 50 odd state or whatever. And that horror film will play. I'm like, oh. And then I think of staying home. And then the other horror film plays where I'm like, always wondering what if. I'm always beating myself up for never taking a risk. And then I go, hold on. Cognitive behavioral therapist I want to work with pointed out, have you noticed how your mind just skips forward like 2 years? And at no point do you have like little bits of agency within this. And it's because I put so much pressure on a certain decision versus changing it to like an experiment. Go, you know what? Let's run an experiment. Let's do this for 3 to 6 months. If you notice that like some of the highest agency, whether it's CEOs or scientists, just constantly coming up with hypotheses, are wrong about 80 to 90% of the time, but are iterating so much faster versus people that live in their head. It's a hellish place to be.
It's really interesting what you say about writing things down. So when I first got to Sydney, very, very interestingly, so on a working holiday visa in Australia, you can't work in fitness first. They just won't touch you because you've only got a 1 year visa. You'll be in, you'll be out. And my housemate at the time, a lad called Gorgeous George, he invited me to an event and he wouldn't tell me what the event was because he knew if he told me I wouldn't go. So I had to meet him at Bondi Pavilion at 7 p.m. I think it was on a Monday or a Tuesday. And he goes, bring activewear. And I said, what are we doing? Like, are we getting boozed? He goes, no. So I get there and he goes, right, we're going upstairs. There's something called No Lights, No Lycra. And it is a pitch black rave in the dark, sober for an hour. And at first I was thinking, this is my idea of hell. But we get in there, they close the doors. They even cover the fire exit sign with a t-shirt, pitch black. And it's like Swedish House Mafia. Everyone's raving in there. Everyone's having a good time. Sweaty as hell. You get out and everyone goes and swims on Bondi Beach. And it was one of the weirdest things I've ever done. Then swimming in the sea, there's a girl next to me. I say hello. She asks me what I do. I go, I'm a personal trainer. I've just moved from the UK. She goes, where do you work? I go, I'm not in a gym yet. She connects me with someone who gets me into fitness first. Now, the only way out of any gym I could have got in was through a franchise. And there was only one franchise in Sydney that I ended up joining. So they pretty much vouched for me, got me in, whatever. And I look back now and think, if I didn't do a rave in the dark in Bondi and end up swimming in the sea and get chatting to a stranger, I would never have gone into the gym, which is where pretty much my career started to take off. Now, working for that franchise, it didn't work out, but I had to go to these almost mandatory meetings. And on one of them, we used to get set kind of like cheesy sales stuff or self-development or whatever. And I remember one day I get given, I think it was an A1 sheet of paper. Yeah, it's like whatever, a big piece of paper, maybe A2. I'm not sure for any paper experts out there. And it was a schedule on it. I had to write down goals for the year, 5-year goals, things I'm going to do. And I looked at it and I thought, fuck this. Like, I hate this shit. When people show me like calendars, like, hey, here's your social media posting schedule. I'm like, ugh. When people are like, oh, this is anything that's organized, I hate it. I can't stand it. I only started using a calendar like last year. And get this thing, and I put it in my backpack, and I'm thinking, I'm never using this. And I get home, I'm in Bondi, and I get this thing out, and I think, bollocks, I'm going to stick it on the wall. So I stick it on the wall, put a bit of blue tack on, and on there was just weird things that we had been asked to fill out for that hour. And I just made shit up. It goes, what's your lifetime goal? And I wrote, to hit 100,000 followers. And then it said, 2 things you want to do this year. And I wrote, do an event in the UK, do an event in Australia. And I don't even know why I wrote that. Even now, I don't know why I wrote that. I was just like, well, if 100K is the goal, I probably should do some kind of event. Then I had to write down my monthly revenue. And I never really looked. I just got paid through PayPal every week. I take the money, not put enough aside for tax, which is like a normal 20-year-old PT. And then every day I woke up, I would have to look at it. I'd have to like have a little look. And I kind of didn't think much of it. And being a boy, nothing else decorated my room. It was just that. There wasn't any plant pots. I just had bed sheets, like every man just lives with pillows, bed sheets. I had one thing stuck on the wall, no decorations. So the next month I did my accounts on PayPal and I wrote it down. And then I booked my first ever UK event only because it was on that bit of paper. And I didn't even want to do it. It was just on that bit of paper and I was faced with 2 outcomes. I either do it or I don't. Now, doing it seemed like less traumatic pain than not doing it because I thought if I get to the end of the year and there's stupid scribbles on a bit of paper that I didn't action, I'm going to feel like a failure. Now, that event that I ended up doing, 180 people came to it. And Luke, who you know and I know, who's now my manager, messaged me because he saw me doing events off my own back and said, I will do those for you. So if I didn't meet that girl in the pool or in the sea, and I hadn't gone to a rave in the dark, I wouldn't have got into a franchise. I wouldn't have been given this A1 bit of paper that I wouldn't have put on the wall, where I wouldn't have written an arbitrary thing to do an event, which I wouldn't do an event to then meet my manager. But the craziest part was February, March, April, May, I had to write down the revenue in which I was doing. Now, April, when I wrote down the revenue, it was $300 less than the month before. And I sat on the edge of my bed and I was like, oh, I would never have noticed that decline in revenue if I hadn't have written it down. And I probably only sat there for 2 minutes on the edge of my bed and I vowed that that would not happen again. So the next month, I don't miss a live. I'm on the balcony. I've got the little bird next to me chirping. I'm doing Facebook Lives every day. There was a level of intensity that I didn't even realize I was aware of. I'm reconciling my accounts down the road in a coffee shop, my friend Lucy Lord. And I looked at the amount of money and I go, this can't be right. This can't be right. I'm doing the maths. I get her to check the maths. I doubled my revenue in 1 month just from seeing a little thing that I'd written. That A1 piece of paper changed my life and I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to write things down. The worst part was the goals I put down there weren't even real. Now, what you said about the whiteboard, I have a static whiteboard downstairs. In the room next to me, I have a whiteboard and my desk at home has a whiteboard in front of it and I've written things on there. So behind my monitor, they cannot escape. They cannot leave my mind. I put a little box next to it. And until I tick that box, I vowed to never erase them. Now, the goals on there are massive. They are things that would probably shock even my friends, but they're there. They're written down and there is such an impact, which I never realized before. And people think they can use the notes section in their phone, but it's all too easy for that to disappear. It's not physical. It doesn't exist because the notes section in my phone can disappear. I could never look at it. But the only way that text from the whiteboard disappears is if I rub it off. And the psychological implications to me doing that is like not doing the event in 2017. So what you've said there has hit me on such a personal note. to write
What
things
a
down.
story. What a story.
Yes.
First, I love the sliding doors anecdote. I think there's a lot around like engineering luck that we could talk about. But on the whiteboard side of things, what you spoke about there is, so that Kidlin's law idea that once you write something out or at least understand the problem, you're like 50% of the way they're solving it. And I say with a whiteboard, I think it's actually 70% because you get that first 50%, but you get that remaining 20% just by the fact it sits there whispering into your subconscious. It's constantly there. It's constantly there as you walk past it. And that's one big thing. And this was something I'm embarrassed to say. I only discovered like 3 to 6 months ago, which I was an Apple Note like fiend. Like everything would be in my notes on my phone. And there's a few problems with that. Like, the first problem is when we have this thing, it whispers so many things to you. Like my phone is, what about you? If my phone's in the room, it's constantly whispering, like, check me. It's all these different apps. And if I really pay attention to my thought, I can feel it whispering. But what's strange is, I listened to a writer talk about when he was doing his first book, that he would go for a walk in the evening with just a notepad and pen, just for an hour. And that is just so much better than the Apple Notes. And there's a few reasons why I like that, which is, first off, the notepad starts to whisper to you. So but everything that's in that notepad whispers to you, that's already been there, but also like in terms of writing now, it begins to whisper to you. But also this idea that with your phone or with digital, it just disappears into the abyss. The mind has this real hard time of understanding like different Apple Notes or different notes that you have on your phone. But with a notepad or a whiteboard, it exists somewhere, and I think it taps into a certain part of your brain that a phone just can't do.
Have you heard of Jerry Seinfeld's way of being creative?
Remind me, maybe.
He mandatory would have to sit in a room. I think it was for 2 hours a day. Now, no distractions, nothing, but he never said to himself he had to come up with material. He never said to himself that he had to pick something funny. He just had to do the time. Now, if he sat in the room for 2 hours with nothing, he would be fine with it. But if he didn't sit in the room, that's where he would punish himself. So even that man going for the walk with a notepad, standing in front of a whiteboard, whatever it is, it's almost, you don't need to accomplish or discover anything. You get to set the metric of success as just doing it. And I think that, again, is a big reflection for like a lot of people. For someone to create material, 2 hours, I don't think I get 10 minutes of stillness a day, which is probably why I quite enjoy jiu-jitsu, surfing, riding my skateboard, because on my skateboard, I can't use my phone. So all of these things, and driving as well. Driving is a very creative time for me because, again, we've got that System 1, System 2, Daniel Kahneman again. This is a weird thing I've discovered recently. I have such an issue shutting off that if I want to have downtime, I have to have a nap because I can't just relax. If I need to absorb content, I need to be driving. I need to be doing something at the same time. And to fall asleep, I have to be listening to a podcast. So this is so bad that my because my brain has to be engaged in something. Because let's say a podcast takes up 20% of cognitive computing. No podcast takes up 50% because then I start thinking about things. And, was it... what's his name, Dali, who used to hold a spoon over a jar as he fell asleep. And as he hit the event horizon of falling asleep, he'd drop the spoon, wake up, have his good ideas. For me, I'm the same. I've very much got some kind of mental hyperactivity where the better of two evils is having something to listen to. It puts me into a calming state that falls asleep. So for me, being in a room, that would be hell. But if you gave me a whiteboard, I would then have something with a little bit of cognitive computing. I actually had this once where 2 years ago, I had, which is weird. Basically, I went through a period of my life where I was just feeling a bit off, and I've never suffered with mental health. I've never been depressed and any of that. I was a bit more anxious than usual. So I started a bit of therapy, hated it. Went and got an ADHD assessment. And even though I got the diagnosis, I'm still a bit wary of it because, again, I kind of went in. Anyway, it's too fashionable for me in some ways. I didn't want the meds anyway, so I did that. And then I did a blood test. Turns out I had pretty low testosterone. And since doing testosterone, felt fine, whatever. But I remember one day I was having a brand identity crisis, a personal brand identity crisis. And I locked myself in my room and I started whiteboarding who I am, what my brands are, what my values are, and what social media platforms, what bits of content. If you'd come into that room and looked at that, you would have gone, this guy's having a mental breakdown. But it was so crazy that in my head, I couldn't map out who I was, what I was doing, what I was making content about. But on that whiteboard, it was clear as day. And it was helping me understand. It's weird. It was almost as if two people can converse to get a better understanding of each other. But sometimes using a whiteboard, you're conversing with yourself to have a better understanding of what you are thinking. And that to me is, again, something I arrived very, very late to.
It's awesome. You sound like you was in a mix of like the busy trap, vague trap, and grind trap, all like merging together to create this weird love child. I think the two techniques, I think, you ever heard the phrase eating a frog?
Is this Mark Twain? If you have to eat a frog, eat it first thing in the morning. No, if you have to eat, if you have to eat a frog, eat it first thing in the morning, then you haven't got to think about it anymore. And if your job's to eat two frogs, eat the biggest one first. Is that it?
Yeah, basically exactly that. And it's kind of taken in the kind of productivity sphere as doing the most important task first thing in the morning. And often, sometimes I always say, often you want to be addressing or answering what's the most important question each day. And then you may sit there and go, I don't know what the most important question is today. And there you've just found it. Like finding out what the most important question is to answer today. Like you've already found it. So I love that because it's already got something pre-built in. But with the eat a frog side of things, I feel this part in like our maybe like the high agency trap version is kind of cliche. But I think there's bits of nuance there, which is one, like trying to identify the bottleneck. And sometimes that could just be sitting down and really thinking like, what is the biggest bottleneck that exists with all my problems right now? And then trying to do that first thing. Like one of the best hacks I found, you talked about Jerry Seinfeld's one. I found like a more that on steroids, which comes from the writer Tim Urban, who's like the king of procrastination, both in his talks, but actually in his real life. And he struggled with a book for 6 years. And the one thing that he started doing was carrying a chess timer with him. When he'd get up in the morning, you'd have 4 hours that you'd have to write the book. And then there's 12 hours for other things. And as soon as the day started, the other things timer started ticking down. Tick, 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 tick. And then as soon as he started writing the book, the other thing, and he had to do 4 hours that day. And his rule was the 12 hours could never go down before the 4 hours went down. And when he would go to the bathroom, he would flick the switch. When he would have a chat with his girlfriend, he'd flick the switch. And really, and if you actually get 4 hours done and you eat that frog, it's incredible. And I realized how little I do that. But then the nuance here, like the idea handle as well, I think we often over our type of people, or the way maybe the neurotic people like us, like we over index on the eating the frog, which I think is important, but also licking a toad. I think each day trying to eat a frog and lick a toad. So lick a toad comes from like obviously psychedelics, right? Trying to do an activity that makes you forget who you are. And I have certain friends, my friend, I had this a guy called David once gave me a great piece of advice. And he was saying, think about you, George. He goes, you've got to mind like a horse. Because some people, they've got to mind like a donkey. They can just kind of do whatever and it's fine. They can go out 12 beers, next day, they're up, they're fine. Whereas you've got to mind like a horse. If you don't water it, if you don't look after it, this horse will go fucking mental. But if you like properly look after this horse, it's a great thing. And I think whether that's, there's certain people I think they need to be, and this is probably a criticism I have of cliche like gym bro, is I almost think the state change there compared to a jiu-jitsu or like an hour of meditation or an hour of e-foiling or surfing or like hard cardio is nowhere near as good. It doesn't lick the toad the same way. So like trying to think about how you can lick the toad stronger and eat the frog faster is a constant question. And both those things are a bit yin and yang as well.
You know, I had a very interesting discussion with TJ Power about dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, and endorphins. And being a typical gym bro myself, actually, one thing, tangent on that, I hate to bring it back to fitness, but in a good training program, you do the hardest thing first. It's like the biggest principle. You do not leave the hardest thing towards the end of a workout because intensity, intent, all of those things diminish over time. I hate bringing fitness analogies into it. I did it for years. TJ Power, and I realized that I've been very guilty of misinterpreting or muddying the waters between different brain chemistry. And I take him for a session of jiu-jitsu. He's never done it before, training together. And at the end of it, he goes, I get why people are hooked on this. And he broke it down. He goes, and I'm going to butcher this. He goes, we get dopamine from acquiring new skills, But we also get dopamine from the production of heat. So you get it from a sauna, but you could also get it from learning something, but you could also get it from exercising. And then there was an oxytocin component, which I've forgotten. Then the endorphins from trust. When you build trust in someone, you get some. Then there was, so all 4 chemicals. Sometimes you could go lift some weights, play with a group of puppies, go have a sauna. You could do all those things and get all the different chemicals you want. You could have a great day. But in jiu-jitsu, you get the exercise, the production of heat. There's an intense trust element to it, because when someone chokes you out and you tap, if they don't stop, you could die. If someone submits you with an armbar and they don't stop, they break your arm. The consequences for that barrier of trust are so severe. So when you're sparring with someone, you are putting your trust in them. They're putting their trust in you. You're in this wonderful dance of exercise, sweat, bonding, learning, respecting each other, trying to beat them, trying to be kind. You get every single periodic table of what makes a human brain happy, and you put it all into one place, which is why I think people get so addicted. And I couldn't believe that it took me 8 years of training to realize that's why. At the same time, on the gym, you go to change a song, then you're checking Twitter, then you're on LinkedIn. I'm pretty sure there was a study out recently that checking Instagram between sets diminished the ability of how much you could lift. So we can't even fully unplug in a traditional gym session, but in jiu-jitsu, your phone stays with your water bottle, with your mouth guard, it stays off the mats. When you step on, there's a whole different set of attitudes that you have to have, which is why so many people get caught up in it, and it becomes a bit culty, but it's quite a nice cult. It's quite a nice status hierarchy to be a part of. But yeah, this is why and many people have truly been jiu-jitsu pilled. Now, this discussion we've had so far, I think, has been incredible. And I'm kind of getting to the point now where I'm thinking we'll wrap up. There's so much there to be in. I'm actually excited to get you on again, hopefully in a few months' time, so we can carry on from exactly where we finished off. So any closing remarks, things you want to share, places you want to send people? I'll put links to all your socials in the description. Where would you like people to find you? Plug anything you want to plug.
Yeah, I appreciate it, James. It's been really fun. Again, it goes back to the example earlier of like ambitious Brits and like down to earth Americans. You obviously fall in the former camp, so it's great. I would say, if you want to read more about high agency, just go to highagency.com. I also have a Substack now where I kind of put ideas out regularly. George Mack on Twitter. I mean, in terms of closing advice, again, figure out what specific low agency trap that you're in. Try and be as intentional as you can. Eat a frog, lick a toad. We're all going to die. None of this means anything. The Milky Way, compared to the size of us compared to the Milky Way and the ever-expanding universe, none of it matters. Have some fun.
Love that. That's been honestly such a great chat. I'm excited to get off here and message Luke and be like, mate, that was so good. But mate, enjoy Austin. I'll probably be over at some point soon. Great to do this, and very much looking forward to catching up with you again. Thank you very much for your time.
So much fun, man. So much fun, man.